But on Sundays, of course, it's Week in Review, Week Ahead. And we're delighted, as always, to welcome Christof Rühl, but our special guest every month, John Defterios, chairman of the Agora Group, and of course, known to everybody as the former emerging markets editor and anchor at CNN, and enjoying, I hope, some quieter times, not having to run around the world to all the biggest news stories, John. And perhaps you might even be standing on the runway in Kabul airport today if you were still in your former employment, but you're not, and you're here to be able to comment. Let's sort of take a bigger sweep, John. It's sort of the end of August. My kids went back to school today, so it's literally the new season kicks off. What's your take from Friday, the big speech by Powell, and the whole month as it sits?
Well, it's nice to be back, and that's a good place to start, Sean, because it's going to have wider implications, because we were expecting something a bit more decisive from Jay Powell in terms of when is the Federal Reserve going to act and start to taper, number one. The tapering is probably going to carry forward now. The timing of it is just not clear, and it's not clear what they're going to do on interest rates before 2022 next year. So what was going to be a shock to the market, and we have the NASDAQ and the S&P 500 now at records after his speech, was really a lot of noise, and then it went almost silent. In fact, nothing to worry about. Nobody wants to pull the punch bowl right now. So the shock may be when the Fed decides to act, that will rattle what we have today in terms of very high PE ratios. Now, if you break a few of the numbers down, according to Powell, they were looking at three key issues right now: employment, full employment, which I'm sure Christof will talk about; inflation, the 2% target, it's above that right now. In fact, for July, if you look at one basket of the consumer price index, it's the highest since 1991, above 4%. So, what are we waiting for? Now, I'll just add one caveat to that. If you sit in the UK and you look at the caseload here because of the Delta variant, we're running above 30,000 cases a day. The hospital rates are not high because the vaccine penetration is indeed very high. We're looking at nearly 80% in the UK. So that's the plus to getting the vaccinations out. If you look at certain states in the US, particularly Florida and through the Gulf of Mexico area, which has the hurricane, which we can address a little bit later, but then stretch up to the Midwest. These are the low penetration vaccination rates. And this could come to snap back the US economy here in the winter months. I'm sure this is factoring into the Federal Reserve Board thinking, and clearly for OPEC on Wednesday now. There's a lot of these things at play. The Delta variant, near term, of course, is Hurricane Ida, which is packing a powerful punch as well.
Well, let's welcome, as always, Christof Rühl, Senior Research Scholar, Center on Global Energy Policy at Columbia University. Christof, we saw oil prices take on a soaring tear last week, right from the get-go Monday morning, up over 12%, the biggest weekly gain in a year, as equities also hit new highs. What's your take on last week?
Good morning, and good morning to John, also the other John, my favorite sparring partner. I think it's not only what he said that there's the worry about taking away the punch bowl and all that. It's also that the reaction to when the punch bowl goes isn't clear at all. It used to be, I remember after the economic crisis 2008, 2009, there used to be a period when everybody said bad news, for example, on the labor market, and so was good for the market because it meant the Fed would pump in money some longer, and good news was bad because it meant they would start tapering. And you remember the taper tantrum, and this was real fear. Now the market reaction is all over the place, so it's not clear when they start tapering actually whether the market expects bond yields to go up or down. You think it's clear they stop buying bonds, so bond prices should fall, yields should go up. But if that reflects, strong economy and no fear in equity markets, then bond demand may go up because people are willing to put their money back in there. It's not clear if bond yields fall, whether equities prices will go up or down. Not that clear for the similar reason that it could reflect a very strong economy with continued earnings growth until the Fed acts. And then even if equity prices go down, it's not clear at what point this leads to actual deleveraging and problems in the financial sector. And when that feeds back to economic growth and to oil prices. So it's a long-winded way of saying We don't know exactly what's in Powell's mind, and we don't even know if he takes the punch bowl gradually, as is the whole discussion, what exactly the market reaction will be. To me, that is, lo and behold, sort of good news, because it indicates that people are not overly worried market participants. They do see economic growth strong enough. They do see the virus probably coming back in a bad winter ahead, but without sort of panic mode. And when you look at oil prices, this almost looks like buying in the dip in the stock market. The same price goes down 5% or 10%, whatever it was, and then immediately it bounces back sharply. And I think that reflects this kind of market expectation that not all is lost, and that overall we may have some adjustments to this flash in the pan growth, but the situation has stabilized. And stepping back even further, the most important sort of high-level background item there, I think, is the common perception that no matter what happens now on the virus front, it's going to be increasingly a problem of the non-vaccinated. In other words, if we don't get a mutation which breaks systematically through vaccinations, what you see all over the place is that vaccinated people, even if they get sick, they die less and they go to the hospital less. And so the perception is that no economy in the world, no big one, will allow another full-scale lockdown as we had in 2020, 21. And so what you do is you learn how to live with the virus. And unfortunately, this doesn't mean the virus is gone. It means that we have to live with it. And that means that everything is concentrated on vaccinations, and that sooner or later we will see rules which favor those who vaccinate and unfavor those who don't, and that we will see those who remain stubborn or who are suffering a little bit more. And the others continue to go to work and pay for it.
You both sitting in London today could go to a football match with 80,000 people unmasked. It clearly looks like the UK has taken the post-COVID view. But John, my question is in terms of the decision last week by Powell really to sort of step back again from any bold action. The window, it seems to me, for Fed engagement, i.e. tapering, is closing, and closing sharply come January because we're in another election year. And given the severity of a tapering impact potentially on the markets, Powell, who's looking to get reelected as Fed governor, will not be able to take moves from January that would impact the election cycle. So really, we're in a very narrow window now. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a great point, Sean. And also, I would add to that, as Fed chairman, does Joe Biden want to rock the boat and his team after the debacle we've seen in Afghanistan, of course, where maybe the idea was a good one, the execution was terrible. And this is very interesting because you're going to look at the top 5 things on the American list, the average American's list. Afghanistan would not show up, but the nastiness of the divisiveness of the parties is making it a heck of an issue. And the fact that there's no collaboration with the allies before that decision was made is quite shocking as well. So there is no reason for Biden to kind of not reappoint Jerome Powell as the Fed chair. I agree with you. I don't think that the tapering is going to be that much of a shock to the market, as Christof was saying. This has been talked about so often. I think what is going to be impactful would be a major interest rate move in 2022. And then this idea of how interventionist the Biden administration wants to be. They started to take the same tone with OPEC Plus, as you saw here, asking them to be responsible and make sure that they release the 400,000 barrels a month to bring down prices, even accelerate that process to make sure the consumer doesn't get hit very hard at this. I don't think the OPEC Plus is weighing that too strongly right now, because now with Afghanistan and the state it is, they probably won't hear from the White House again on that front. So that's another interesting dynamic to play here. And as you talked about, here in the UK is extraordinary. They have the music festivals on, the football matches on, and then my daughter's starting university in the next 3 weeks, and they're talking about doing virtual classes again. So the lack of leadership and definition, are they trying to get herd immunity yet again before the winter months? I think it's part of the strategy, but it's crazy leading up to the winter months if you go to a lockdown, which could affect growth. By the way, I'm starting one of 4 roles this week. I went to go look at my new office, which is in Bloomsbury. And you could fire cannons up and down the streets. I mean, part of it's the end of the summer, of course, but a lot of it is the fact that there's empty office space in the center of London. So what's the new normal going to look like? But the city center here, this dynamic financial market, remains pretty empty in terms of restaurants. It's not as bad as it was 6 months ago, but it's clearly not a fantastic form. So to getting to the point here with the Federal Reserve, there's many cities in the United States are going to get derailed here at the end of this year, going into the first quarter of next year. It'll impact the Fed's thinking. I think Powell is probably safe for a renomination by Biden, and Biden needs to make sure that the economic growth remains stable.
Christof, the fundamentals we saw last week vis-a-vis the oil markets, inventories continue to decline. Rig counts continue to be pretty much flat to maybe a little bit more, but no noticeable even rigs. Somebody's posting on the message, we're down 3. I think that includes the whole of North America, not just the US, but ultimately not much movement on rig count, i.e. we're still not seeing the American oil production come back. So those fundamentals, the market continues to move into a tighter and tighter space.
Yes, it does. And the question for oil prices, of course, this will all be a function of demand, and that will be a function of economic growth. So we have to be back to square one. But I think we can say a few things, put some light in this darkness in a systematic way. Number one, I think John and I both agree, tapering is not such a big deal. If interest rates increases will be a big deal. Then the signal to watch out for is what happens on the inflation front, right? And there, at least in the US, the numbers have been going up, and the Fed is saying, don't worry, it's a temporary blip and it will come back down. And other indicators outside the consumer basket, such as house prices, are going out of whack. So they're going very high. So the inflation fear should not be discounted. If inflation rates go up, you should expect an interest rate reaction that will bring growth, that will harm economic growth going forward. Number two, we still have a system full of bottlenecks, and to my surprise, they don't seem to go away. I mean, you have these surveys asking industries, are you experiencing material shortages somewhere? And it's still all over the place. It's not just containers stuck in China. It's not just the famous semiconductors. It is plastic. It is paper to some extent. It used to be wood, and now it's no longer. So that also will drive prices up in addition to the underlying inflationary pressure. Hard to disentangle, but will go into this direction of a discussion of interest rates. And then number three, John described it very well. I'm sitting here in South Ken. I've never, ever in all the years we lived here seen it so dead. You used to be unable to park. Now there's parking spots all over at night. The apartment blocks are largely dark because the owners are foreigners and they're not here. So it's just people gone out of London plus tourists not coming into London. And meanwhile, it's not just here in Germany. They used to have almost eradicated the virus, but now the incidence rates is half of what it was at the highest point. It's shooting up very, very fast. And it's all driven by young people and by returners from holidays. And that means, as I said before, there's a third uncertainty, which is if the virus really comes back in a bad way, meaning in a bad way for the economy, leading to lockdowns, then this interest rate discussion would be deferred a little bit. And I think the impact on oil prices comes from the outcome of all of that. So will there be an interest rate increase or not? Will growth be slow or not? And it leads me straight back to the place which we have discussed many times here. To me, the first quarter, the first half of 2022 is going to be decisive, because that will be after the winter. It will be either a period of optimism and again, gung-ho going into the summer, growth will be high, everything will be fine, or it will be a depressed period because growth numbers are coming in lower than expected, because an interest rate increase is looming and because lockdowns may have occurred in some area. But it will be a period where oil supply has increased. Both if OPEC sticks to its schedule, also slowly but surely from the shale patch, from Brazil, from Guyana. So it will be a period where if growth expectations are not gung-ho, where oil prices will come under pressure.
John, on that point, I mean, the other thing that supported oil prices last week was the hurricane season really kicking into gear, as known as Ida. They shut in, I think, the majority of production in the Gulf of Mexico. This is another sort of wind in the sails, no pun intended, for the oil markets today and through the hurricane season.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And I just was checking on the latest numbers, Sean. It's gone up quite a bit over the last 48 hours in terms of the shut-ins, because we're at about 90% on oil production and 85% when it comes to gas production. They're suggesting now that this is not only hitting on the 16th anniversary of Hurricane Katrina on Sunday, but category 4, that could even be worse. And they're actually saying that storm surge is going to be 10 to 15 feet. So the amount of flooding is going to be substantial. And this is an area of the United States I know well because of the oil and gas coverage over the last 3 decades. So in the Sabine Pass and Port Arthur, the large refineries and the import-export facilities that you two both know about with Cheniere, for example. And then you have to worry about Port Arthur on the other side as well in terms of its output, the rig shut-in. Now, most of these things are overrated near term and then level off very quickly thereafter, unless it's the scale of Katrina, and that's what Ida looks like. So this could be the surprise.
But the week before, we had the 400,000 barrel Mexican production shut in, which is still low, mostly shut in. Now we've got over what I think close to 2 million in the U.S. Gulf of Mexico. I mean, these all add up over the course of a month to be a significant amount of supply.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I can see the chat here taking place saying that the numbers do look significant. So that will be quite a shock. So, and the debate that we're having online here about OPEC Plus, I mean, I don't think it has much choice but to proceed with the plan and not have one of these surprises where His Royal Highness, Prince Abdulaziz, like to keep the market guessing all the time. I don't think it's going to be the case this time. This seems like almost a slam dunk. But thereafter, what happens to demand and how the Fed policy plays into it is a real question. That Motiva plant is owned by Saudi Arabia, by the way, so it's going to be impacted, it seems, in terms of these shut-ins there on the border between Louisiana and Texas.
Sorry, go ahead, Christof.
There's another impact of that, which might be, I agree on the oil patch, except I wouldn't be prepared to bet against His Highness not surprising markets. But there's another part of that, which is LNG. The LNG prices in Europe and in Asia have been very high already. With a significant hurricane disruption in the run-up to the COP26 meeting in Glasgow, this might have an impact on the entire discussion also about natural gas versus coal versus the introduction of a carbon price, which is still open. So if LNG deliveries got disrupted for a little bit longer and if prices for natural gas in Europe and in Asia stay very high, this may be actually very bad for the decarbonization efforts which have been sort of planned to be underway. It's something to watch for the longer term. That may be a longer term consequence, which I agree not see in oil markets.
Let's get the survey question and move to the week ahead. I'd like to talk a week ahead, obviously the OPEC meeting and also the end of the Afghanistan evacuation, 2 big moments next week. But let's first ask the room, should OPEC maintain its plan to raise supply by 400,000 barrels a day per month when they meet on September 1st? The question is not will they, but what do you think? Should they? Should OPEC maintain this supply plan? They did 400,000 in August, now 400,000 in September, and so on. It's 400,000 every month is the plan. So September 1st is for September. Should they maintain it? Yes or no? Welcome the views of the room. John, before we tackle OPEC, let's just look a little bit at this Afghanistan thing in the sense of what the ripples could be for everything and for Biden as president. We're going to end up, according to my research, with 1,000 American citizens still stuck in Kabul and about 10 to 20,000 visa holders who are people who were seen as supporting the U.S. mission and were given the right to emigrate to America. So in behind planes take away, you're still have 1,000 American citizens there. What's your take? How big a moment is this? Where could it go?
Well, it's interesting. We were talking about the anniversary of Hurricane Katrina, Sean. We're looking at the 20th anniversary of 9/11, right? And this resonates really strongly with the American public. And that's what Joe Biden was thinking about here and his team when they made their decision. They wanted to have this cleaned up. Ironically, it's it's the reverse, right? Because it wasn't handled well. But they wanted to be able to say we've exited Afghanistan by X date. They're still doing it, but what damage for nearly a month now. In usual August quiet months, Joe Biden's been kind of locked into Washington, the entire team having to give briefings every single day and trying to do this kind of record, rescue out of Afghanistan, Kabul, and even now using exits into Pakistan to hit these numbers. Often it's talked about, at least from the Republicans, in this ridiculous nature of calling for impeachment, which is absurd in a crisis. But nevertheless, Joe Biden's Vietnam moment, I don't think it's going to be that withstanding or that lasting, if you will. But I think there's wider implications that we should talk about. And I like Joe Biden. I think he delivers on his promises, but it brings into question the infrastructure plan. What will he get? What he wants going forward? Is this going to make him weaker? I think physically we have to start thinking about Joe Biden in terms of delivering how much he can withstand as a 79-year-old president. He's looking slower. I know he has a stuttering problem. I covered him, in fact, when I worked in Washington and followed his career in foreign policy. However, this is the biggest risk factor is if Joe Biden actually slows down to the point where it starts to deter his presidency. And I know people who ran his campaign that said they kind of monitored him and protected him and didn't expose him too much. They didn't have a choice. And he was on the front line of this and he wanted to be. Kamala Harris in Southeast Asia, taking a bash at China. So I think the broader implications of Afghanistan is that the US now needs to look tough against China, particularly in the South China Sea. And that was the attempt by Kamala Harris. I don't think she's ready for the big leagues when it comes to having to move up to the presidency, if that was the case. So I'm just putting in biggest risk factors. I'm not saying this is something that's going to happen. Afghanistan has created a huge vacuum for China and Russia to fill. We've talked about in the past the strategic assets and the strategic nature of the position of Afghanistan as a country. And I think China and Russia have kind of a green light now to maintain these relations with the Taliban. Will they be the lead going forward? Relations between Russia, China, and Iran, a new petroleum minister in place in Iran now. These are major shifts. So I think it's interesting to see Saudi Arabia and Qatar getting closer together. Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid, the ruler of Dubai and the prime minister of the UAE, meeting with Sheikh Tamim this week as well. So you see the political chess match that takes place.
There's a lot of, there's an earthquake going on, and you ultimately don't know where you stand. Christof, your thoughts on the ramifications of another way you see it? I mean, one thing I note is the absolute absence of the Blinken foreign minister and the US defense minister seeming in a moment like this to be complete lightweights. Christof, your thoughts on the ramifications?
On the US, I agree that's a risk factor. It's a surprise because so far the Biden team has impressed because they were extremely well prepared. They knew exactly for the first 100 days what they wanted to tackle and how they wanted to do it. And they moved, I mean, really at high speed and with very few or no mistakes in major areas. Now suddenly they look, if I agree with John, if Biden sort of something becomes incapacitated, there is no second sort of closed person who could step into that without creating major uncertainty. Certainly not Kamala Harris. That's what she's demonstrating now. But stepping back from the US leadership problem, I think there's a lot of positives in these developments as well. So number one, the Taliban are not the Taliban from 20 years ago. They may become them, but they're not there yet. So there is a degree of moderation with the leadership having been in exile for 20 years.
I'm not so sure about that, though, Christof. We don't know which. Yeah, I think it's no. But I started to jump in on you. I just think there's two phases to the Taliban. So I hope it's a more moderate Taliban. But the military side is a little bit different. So this is again a wild card.
They're not as powerful, and the people in Afghanistan, there are more people resenting them. There's already tribal unrest there. But my point number two is, suppose you are right and the Taliban are just the same kind of Stone Age people like they were 20 years ago, then it becomes more a problem of China and Russia, which is it's not a bad shift to have, and for the US to move out is a benefit. Thirdly, then the repercussions in the region, of the gold producing regions, when we come to oil producers, are roundabout positive because, I mean, it forces everyone, including Iran, to start to talk to each other. And at the end of the day, that's what is necessary. I mean, Obama was right when he said you have a fight on the schoolyard, you better go to some corner and duke it out. You cannot always have the teachers sort your problems. So if those producers in the region start getting more engaged to each other and starting to talk to each other, that's a positive for the Iranian-Saudi relationships, for Yemen, for all the derivatives, and also for the safety of oil production.
Well, there's no shortage.
So stepping back, I see some light there, not just darkness.
Yeah, there's a lot of issues at the moment. I mean, we haven't even mentioned Lebanon, which in of itself is in crisis mode. But John, let's move to the OPEC's decision. Obviously, that is the big story for the markets this week as well. All signals are it's a rollover. Your thoughts, expectations?
I think Christof makes a very good point, though, because Prince Abdulaziz, and I think after the kind of the spat that we saw with the UAE, relations that were strained during the front end of the pandemic, you can't go in with any sort of shock value. So I do think that OPEC, unless something changes radically in the thinking of the leadership in Saudi Arabia, which I don't see, I think they continue with their plan. And then what I think is very impressive about His Royal Highness and Novak and their collaboration, now that the UAE problem seems to be solved, is that they are willing to respond to market pressures. But right now, one of the market pressures front and center is what we're seeing with Hurricane Ida. So it would be a mistake to reverse that policy. They're watching the Delta variant very carefully. And if they need to, kind of taper that reimposition of that oil supply, they will do so. I just don't see it right now, unless there's a really strong caseload that starts to hit Asian travel, which is picking up. We saw the demand for jet fuel pick up. So I think OPEC is in a fairly good position right now after that shock of oil prices the first 3 weeks of August, the recovery, the stability. Afghanistan's going to be solved near term because it's not going to be at the crisis level we saw over the last couple of weeks. So it should be a green light for them to proceed with the policy.
Okay, let's get the survey result and give Christof the last word on that. So should OPEC maintain a whopping 3-1? Yes. Your thoughts, Christof?
Well, my thoughts are, first, your questions are always, you presume that everybody here answers the question from the perspective of OPEC, correct? So for example, I said no, because I don't think they should cut anything. Leave that aside.
Or they shouldn't raise.
Yeah, because I don't think we need OPEC, but that's a very different discussion.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, you ask a normative question like that. You presume that we are all asking what's in their interest.
No, because I do think there was a certain amount of a view. Even the week ago when we were having our last Sunday conversation, with oil prices having fallen 10% or whatever before the rally of Monday, there was a number of voices saying that, well, OPEC should revisit this decision. Now a week later, it's quite different. So I'm trying to get the sentiment as to whether that is still present or not.
Yes, I completely understand, but it presumes that everybody agrees there has to be a producer organization capable of scaling up and down production, which not all people do.
I mean, should there be the Fed? They're looking like shouldn't be one, but ultimately there is one.
I think there has to be one as long as you have money.
Yeah.
But so this is the answer I would give from the perspective. I agree they are unlikely to change tack, and it looks wise again to have started gradually. They will probably take a playbook from J. Powell and just say, okay, we monitor the situation. Part of it has been accomplished. Demand is still growing. Supply is under control. Part of it is still lacking. We don't have the full demand, which we expect once the pandemic consequences are over. And therefore, we wait with tapering a little longer. And the tapering would mean to release their members to produce however much they want. And I think that's the playbook they will want to follow, and maybe with some good words around if there are severe hurricane consequences.
Do you think the 400,000
keeps?
Does the 400,000 a month the decision on that? Do you think it has an impact in keeping shale on the sidelines?
Yes, it does, and I think there's two other things. It is difficult for them to turn this up and down increasing or easier because many of the members are now at the level where they really can't ratchet it up too much anymore. On the one hand, and on the other hand, I was terribly impressed about half a year ago when Saudi Arabia did this extra movement and had some flexibility. And this seems to me sort of, if Russia now becomes more like the UAE and assertive to undercut all the time, then this seems to be another page they could repeat anytime. Say, okay, we do a unilateral fine tuning here, and reserve the right to correct the fine tune the course of the big ship called OPEC Plus by the actions of one of the particular engines of it called Saudi Arabia. That has worked very well, and that comes closest to actual sort of gradual monetary policy, if this analogy carries any water, closest to all the things they had.
Yeah, and Sean, on your news digest, you talked about the new petroleum minister, Mr. Javed Oji, coming in, but they're making it very clear they want to rebuild where they were pre-sanctions, right?
The Iranians.
The Iranians. So with the relationship with China and Russia, again, I think is going to come to the fore, especially with Afghanistan. So it'll present a new challenge for OPEC Plus, and I'm sure we'll talk about it in the next session we have together. But COP26 in the United States and here in the UK and Europe is a big deal. So that
even the Queen is going apparently. So that's how big a deal it is.
You know what the biggest problem? The one unresolved area pre the meeting is the question of an international carbon price that cuts right to the heart of the interests of oil producers. So that really is one to watch.
Well, we sit here on Sunday morning with oil price Brent at $72.70. It's a big number. I think any oil producer is going to be very happy with that and unlikely to rock the boat with any changes. So I would expect OPEC to roll over just a bit like we saw with the Fed, as Christof said. But John, wonderful to have you. Before we see you again, obviously taking your daughter to college, that's really exciting. And at the same time feels kind of sad because I have to do the same myself in the coming weeks. And I'm definitely torn by the experience. But have a great month and a great start with all your new opportunities in London. Christof, as always, thank you so much for anchoring Sunday mornings. All the best. We'll be here every morning, 10:30 UAE time, and we'll see where the week goes. Thank you.
All the best.